Welcome to You Had to Be There, the podcast where we deep dive into the world of concerts, musicians, the music industry, and so much more. I'm your host, Julia Gomberg. This week, I had the opportunity to chat with someone I really admire, Brittany Spanos, a senior writer at Rolling Stone. We got to talk about her knowledge in music, fandom, and what it's like to have a career covering some of the biggest artists in the world. Her cover stories have featured interviews with Dua Lipa, Chappell Roan, Adele, Cardi B, and so many more. Brittany also teaches NYU's first ever course on Taylor Swift's cultural and musical influence in music and beyond. Brittany curated a playlist with this episode that is also a must listen, so you can find her playlist in the episode show notes. Thank you so much for listening, and be sure to follow along on Instagram at @uhadtobetherepod. You can also find me on TikTok at @uhadtobetherepod. Thanks again. Catch you next time.
My name is Brittany Spanos, and I am a senior writer at Rolling Stone.
Yeah, I reached out to Brittany because I work for the parent company of Rolling Stone. Like I mentioned before we started recording, I've been like a fan of your work. I have the copy of the Dua Lipa interview sitting in front of me right now. I was excited to see that, like, kind of reading your background, like you're a big pop girl yourself. Can you kind of talk about your relationship with music growing up?
Yeah, I grew up in, I guess, like a family of people who had like big music obsessions. Like no one played music or no one worked in the music industry in any way. Like they were just like people who had like super fandoms of certain artists. So like, my grandpa was really obsessed with Elvis, and my mom was obsessed with Michael Jackson and Prince as a kid, and then like was a huge like Alanis Morissette fan as an adult. And my dad is like a huge Metallica fan and huge metalhead. So like I grew up with people who like were very, very much obsessed with the music they loved. And, just it was always on, like, in the house or in the car. So very, very big music fans. And I myself just like I loved everything that they loved, but I also started to form my own taste as I entered elementary school, and was a huge fan of like boy bands of like NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, and sort of the bubblegum pop of the early 2000s I was really obsessed with. So yeah, I think I was always just like really like kind of like easily attached to fandom before I even knew what that word meant or what it was. And as I hate to use like grew out of boy bands, but I think like once they all started to break up and like they all started to grow up, I got more into pop punk and grunge. And I think getting down the rabbit hole of like rock history and getting really into like 90s music and especially bands that didn't exist anymore, like Nirvana and things like that, like led me eventually to figuring out that there are music magazines that like published a lot of interviews with those bands, and I would read them, and eventually learning that that's a job you could do. And I think it was really just like in middle school starting to get into like reading about music and reading books about music and reading magazines and subscribing to Rolling Stone and Spin magazine, and watching Almost Famous. I was like, oh, that's a job I could do. And so that's the path that was how I was set on this path, was really in middle school, just like realizing that I can turn being a nerd into a career.
What a time to, I think we are similar ages, because I definitely like Backstreet Boys, NSYNC. That was my jam too. Like the like listening on your Walkman and like the car, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And I think that like energy just sticks with you. And like we were just really lucky that was such a peak time for like pop music. And I like want to ask you later on, sort of like, I feel like right now we're in a pop renaissance, and it's obviously very female based than what it was like with boy bands growing up, but I feel like there's such a correlation.
For sure.
Were you always interested in writing specifically?
Yeah, I mean, even before I, realized that music journalist was what I wanted to do, I was a huge reader as a kid. Like I was a very indoor kid. I loved to read. I read books all day, every day. Like, I always like loved the idea of being an author. Whenever I had like a new sort of like, when you're like 7, like a new career change, it was always like that plus author. It was like astronaut plus author, doctor plus author. Like I wanted to write so bad, and I just loved books, and I loved reading, and I wanted to do that. And I didn't, it was like one of those things where I kind of like explored like fiction writing when I was a kid. I kind of like didn't.
Right.
I think it's funny, like when I look back on those journals and you know, my like, you know, little short stories and like little, you know, little forays into fiction writing, and they were always so like kind of journalisty because I'd be like at this time on this day, and the weather was like it was like so fact based. Like I was so obsessed with like the exact facts of it, you know. Like I was just
That's
like I
so
was like, oh,
funny.
maybe I just like always kind of needed to figure out that that was going to be what I was doing.
Yeah, like it was in you and you just kind of had to shape it, and that it was
Yeah.
already kind of there. That's what I
Yeah.
love too. Like I always love hearing like the super early stages because I think it's so innate, and like it's just a matter of how you kind of unfold it and
Yeah.
realize you're like, oh, this is totally, yeah, for me. And like I guess, yeah, like in terms of pop music and fandom, what kind of like relationship, like as you sort of realized, okay, like I'm a fan, there's is this phenomenon of fandom, like did you find community in that, or like what was your relationship to the fandom side of these boy bands and artists?
Yeah, I mean, I not really, I guess, in the sense that it exists now. Like, I think like it was kind of, I didn't really know like the concept of the community part of it when I was really young. Because when I liked NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, and specifically even more so NSYNC, I was much deeper as like a super fan of NSYNC and Justin Timberlake when I was a kid. So I was ages like probably like 6 to 9 when I was really deep in that. So I
Hmm.
had no like, you know, like I had friends who liked it, but it was still like, you know, not like it wasn't like a really a big thing in my school. Like I went to Catholic school and like
Mm.
I think like, you know, it was not really like a big sort of like boy band contingent. I think I was definitely like an outlier in being like a super fan of them. So yeah, I didn't
Right.
really have like a lot of friends who like were super obsessed with them. Um and I didn't really know, like, even when I went to the concerts, I remember always feeling like kind of young. Like my first two
Mm.
concerts were in sync, and I always felt like I was surrounded by like older teen girls mostly,
Right.
who were there with their friends, and it was like me and my dad. Like, you know, it was like, um, so you know, it was like I loved seeing that though. Like I was always kind of like I was always a little jealous, I guess, of like the idea of like, oh, like you can be like this like older teen and you and all your friends go to this concert without any parents, and like
Right.
you're like at this show and screaming your lungs out for your favorite boy band member. So yeah, I mean I got to experience that obviously as I got older, but when I was
Yeah.
first becoming a super fan of stuff, like I definitely was sort of, it was more of like a private experience.
Right. Well, I think that's even more of a testament to like your passion for it because you weren't like following the lead on someone. This was clearly coming from your own like
Yeah.
passion, I guess, in terms of like, okay, and then just happening to, yeah, go to the concert and be like, okay, like there's a lot of people not even like you, because like you said, you were younger, but that must, I don't know, like probably looking back, that must be kind of cool. You were like a trailblazer at like ages 6 to 9. But yeah, I was also thinking like I was definitely more of an NSYNC person too. But what are your thoughts on like the Backstreet Boys doing their residency at the Sphere?
I really need to go. I'm like
Totally.
actually like really desperate to go. I've actually never seen them live, weirdly. Like I've seen so many other boy bands live, and so, and especially like I didn't go to like a lot of concerts when I was really young. Like I like went to like two NSYNC concerts and then
Hmm.
didn't go to any concerts until I was like in high school.
Hmm.
Um and so I didn't really see a lot of that, those like pop acts live when I was a kid. So I obviously, now that I'm a music journalist and like I have been able to have access to that as I've gotten older, like I made up for a lot of lost time, but weirdly
Yeah,
have never seen Backstreet Boys. Um so I'm like really dying to go because I'm also dying to go to the Sphere. But I do
right.
think it'll be really healing to see them in that
That's
environment.
what I think. There's something so nostalgic and healing in that regard, and just imagining so many fans and like the now being like probably the same age as us, and like just having that such a collective moment on such a large scale. Like I can't even imagine how cool that must be.
Yeah.
Obviously, yeah, like you said, you kind of were on more of like a concert hiatus, and then as you got more into your journalism career, that's when you started seeing boy bands. Did you feel like there's similar themes or correlations of what it felt like when you were super young and like seeing these boy bands into like what maybe more recent years have had like their boy bands? Is there like a similarity, or does it feel really different? because it's so more modernized, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think like when when I had seen NSYNC, like I didn't really grasp that concept of like this like larger community that may have existed, and how people connected or how they knew each other, and so it was fun like when I started to go when I would see like One Direction when I was starting at my journalism career. That was like when One Direction was starting to blow up, and I covered them a lot. So I think going to those concerts like really kind of felt very full circle in a way where I was able to experience that not only as now an adult who like has those memories of going to shows when I was younger and experiencing that, but also as like a person who had friends within this fandom and like people I met through writing about One Direction. I met other like girls who were in their early 20s like starting their journalism careers covering this boy band.
Right.
And like we were I wouldn't say I was necessarily like deep in the fandom, but like it was like a weird sort of like mix of like fandom plus journalism where it was like other women my age who were just like starting to become writers and starting their careers, and like we were sort of forming around this boy band. So I think that was
Yeah.
like kind of cool because then I was able to go to those concerts with them and experiencing that. So I was like, oh, like now I'm like one of the older girls at the show with like their friends and like
Totally.
like
You're
dressed
like,
up
yeah,
and
full circle. I see what you
yeah.
mean. Yeah. You're like some other young girls probably looking at you and like having the thoughts that you had when you were at the NSYNC
Yeah.
show. Yeah. That's really cool. And I also just love like as a boy band person too, like I before we were started recording, I said like I'm wearing my Jonas Brothers shirt. I was like in that era. Like
Yeah.
I think there's something so validating of like fan girls, even though that sounds somewhat derogatory, it's like them being such influential parts of the music industry and parts of artist success. And it's like even at you mentioned it's like female journalists, that's such a validating feeling, I feel like, because there is this, I think like we've modernized and people now kind of see fangirling differently, but there's always been that kind of like connotation to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely interesting, and especially today in like the scope of how pop music is really being led by women. I kind of want to go into that, but I'm kind of jumping ahead. Also, I want to ask more about how you sort of ended up at Rolling Stone. So yeah, like once you started entering like college, like did you have a more structured idea of this is what you really wanted to do, and specifically like music journalism?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty structured well before that. Like, I think, like, literally when I was in middle school, I was just like, I'm going to work at Rolling Stone one day. And it was pretty much like the only thing that I worked towards. And so, like middle school, high school, I started to write more and started to like, like do like school papers and like, like the school paper and like, write reviews and like album reviews and whatever, like, interviews and things like that, and took like summer courses and
Mm.
journalism and things like that. And I always knew I wanted to move to New York and make it happen. So
Yeah.
yeah, I went to NYU for undergrad, and my major was in the Gallatin School of Individualized Studies. So it was like literally music journalism.
Oh,
And
amazing. Yeah.
took a lot of music history classes and also like kind of widened it, which I'm glad I did. Like took like film history and theater history and
Hmm.
performances, it's like a lot of like cool sort of like arts criticism classes that went beyond just music and, pop music history. So I think that was really important for it. And
Yeah.
yeah, I got an internship at the Village Voice my junior year. And what was great about being at a place like the Village Voice was that it was pretty loose. Like it was like, pretty unstructured in how the internship worked. So I kind of just like stayed there for a really long time.
Oh, that's
Um
awesome.
and became like a contributor, and they like, I started to like do like this like weird sort of like fake editorial assistant job that they paid me weekly for, and like also got to write a bunch.
That's amazing.
Freelanced a bunch, like did Rookie magazine, and that was a really cool way to meet a bunch of women in the music industry who were working at Rookie as well, like Jessica Hopper and Julianne Escobedo Shepherd. They were contributors for Rookie and editors for Rookie, and also are incredibly iconic music journalists who were writing for like Pitchfork and for Rolling Stone and for Spin and all these publications I wanted to one day be able to write for. And so they helped connect me with editors and were super supportive. And that's I sort of eventually ended up at Rolling Stone just through like literally meeting people through the Village Voice and Rookie Magazine. And also just being like a very very, very active freelancer and writer. So I was literally covering concerts like most days of the week and doing all of that. So yeah.
That's amazing. And like, yeah, I think connections are a big part of it, but it's also so powered and fueled through personal determination. Like you had such a specific like path in your mind. And I think it's no coincidence that you like ended up connecting with those types of people because it's really your passion that's like driving you to get there.
Yeah.
And so when you like got to Rolling Stone, did you sort of have like a moment where you're like, wow, I made it. This is where I saw myself like when I was in the crowd at NSYNC. Like, did you have that aha moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think like it happened even before I like even got the full-time job because I started freelancing like maybe like 6 months before. And I remember like my very first freelance assignment for Rolling Stone was like literally the weekend I graduated from college, and it just
Oh my
felt so
gosh.
like satisfying. Like it was just like, oh, like I just like I'm doing it now. Like it's like really like I have my first assignment for Rolling Stone. I just graduated from NYU, like just like in it now. Like I'm just doing it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's kind of when it started. And then, I felt just like very, very blessed to be able to get there. Like, I started 2015. So I was like, you know, 6 months after I graduated from college, I went full time there. And so just felt really like cool. And I think like overwhelming, because I think in my vision of like when that would happen, obviously when I was like, in middle school, I was like, it's going to happen when I'm 15, like in Almost
Right.
Famous. But then
Yes.
I was like, and then I went to college. I was like, okay, that's not realistic. But I was like, maybe one day, like I can work towards this, and maybe like by like my 30s, I'll be able to like write covers for Rolling Stone and like be full time there. And so it was like really cool that everything kind of happened way earlier than I anticipated. But like,
Yeah.
yeah,
No, that is surreal, but also like again, like I just think it makes sense, like based on just what you're saying and how it like it's so innate for you.
yeah.
I guess like so yeah, you were contributing, you obviously covered a lot of shows. Yeah, is there a type of editorial that you like doing the most?
I love writing profiles. I love doing interviews. I think that's like my number one.
Yeah.
My first cover was Cardi B in 2017, and that one was like it was just like a whole like journey to it, because I was like 25 at the time, and so I was just like I had never written a cover, and like I had never written a long form anything at that point.
Mm.
And also like especially at that time, like I think they really, there's like the same like 3 or 4 people who got all the cover stories there. It was like a pretty like limited pool of people writing them at the time. So I was like 2 years in at the job. Like I was wondering at that point like what will it look like for me to move up? What would it take to like be able to get to that point?
Yeah.
Because once you're inside, it's different than when you're outside. You're like, okay, like is this like actually possible? Like, is it just going to be like, a long, slog to like getting to that point?
Right.
Cardi was someone I had been covering since she was on Love and Hip Hop and started to release mixtapes. And so I had done like an interview with her, like a year before Bodak Yellow came out and she blew up.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so I had been covering her pretty closely. And so literally was doing like what was going to be a short like in book interview with her, because Bodak Yellow had just come out, and like we were like, okay, like let's like get her in book, and like the song was already doing really well, and then it went #1 while we were like working on an issue that like someone else was supposed to be on the cover, and then I think they had dropped, and like then they're like, let's bump Cardi up, and so they were just like, do you want to do it? So I was just like, okay.
Oh my gosh.
And also I'd already done interviews with her. Like, so they were just like, it would have been crazy for them to have like reassigned it like in the middle of it. But I also kind of was just like, maybe they just will. Like, I was just like, I don't know. They're gonna like let me do this. So yeah, so that was really cool. That was like my first one. It happened really quickly, and yeah, it was just like a really insane process.
yeah, what was the process like? I imagine there, I mean, in general, there must be like very long nights, very tight deadlines.
Yeah, I mean, at that time, we were every 2 weeks at that point, and then we
Mhm.
moved to monthly. So this was like
Wow.
before we were even at PMC. So like, it was Rolling Stone was like like basically every other week, and so closing was always chaotic, and it was always like really. Sometimes we would writers would have like months to work on a story, if we had like a lot of advance notice or something, or like, it's like a bigger artist that like is like, I want to be on the cover of Rolling Stone for my album. Sometimes be like a long process, but other times it was like, this song just blew up, like we have to get this person on here, or this thing just happened, like we have to we have to
Right.
cover this. So, now the process is much different, but then it was like literally, I can't even tell you like how quickly it was. Like, remember, it was a pretty, I feel like if I looked back and like found the actual amount of time that we worked on the story, it would probably shock me.
Wow.
Yeah, it was like, immediately had to like go to Baltimore because she was doing like a college performance, and like
Right.
went on the train, like went straight to her hotel, went to her show with her, did an interview. Like, it was just like such a quick turnaround.
Wow.
It was way less than a month. Like, it might have been only like 2 to 3 weeks of
Whoa.
like trying to get it together. And luckily, like lengthwise, it was a little bit shorter than a normal cover story because it was part of the hot issue. So it wasn't like a full like 5 to 6,000 word story. So that was nice. But like, I think I would have like lost my mind if I had to do like a full length
Oh
like
my
cover.
gosh.
So yeah, but it was definitely like a really crazy turnaround because they were trying to like be so on top of getting it out as soon as possible.
Wow. That's really crazy. I cannot even imagine yeah, the short time frame. And then like, did you feel like you were having time to sort of like process what was happening, like you were writing this cover story, or were you sort of like do you get like in a game mode when you have those tight deadlines?
I think it depends. Like, I think with that one, I don't really remember if I did. Like, I think I was just so like scared, and like I
Mm,
think just like trying to make it good, Like, I think that was
right,
like the most important thing, is I wanted to be able to do more of them. Like, I didn't want this to be my only
right.
cover. So I was like, it was more so just like I wanted the story to be done well. I didn't know what that process looked like. I was like working with the editor I had never worked with before. I was like doing, like,
Mm,
it was just like a lot of like stress. I think with other ones, like I honestly don't think like it felt like the process like got really comfortable until like the last couple of years, because
mhm.
there's so much technical stuff behind the scenes to make it happen that's really stressful, that like is like well before even you start writing. And so it's just like, even just like booking the story and doing the reporting is like a really insane process. So like the writing itself depends on like really how much time you get, like how much access you're able to like finagle, like
Yeah,
all this other bullshit like behind the scenes that obviously people aren't really seeing or experiencing, tends
totally.
to affect like your mindset while you're working on the story, more than anything.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that because I think, not to like be shady towards anyone who doesn't know much about music, but I think people do have like misconceptions of even like how albums are made or like how articles are written. Like it's not like you're submitting an essay to your college professor and that's you're just sitting down typing it up and that's it. Like that's probably the like a fraction of all the other stuff that goes into the logistics of getting the pen on the paper.
Yeah, yeah.
Has there been any like standout artists that, yeah, you remember like writing about that ended up being really big or having like big moments?
Yeah, I remember one of the very first features I produced myself was Shawn Mendes.
Mhm.
And it was like one of those things where this was like, this was like a while ago at Rolling Stone. So it was like a little looser, like in terms of like how everything functioned. Especially like the difference between like print and web. So I kind of was just like, I assigned it to myself. Like I was just like, okay, like Stitches had just come out. He had been super big
Mhm.
on Vine. Like I was like and also because I was on Twitter a lot, and I like was sort of engaging with a lot of pop fandom. I noticed that like a lot of like the Directioner girls on Twitter were becoming huge Sean fans. And so I was like, this guy's gonna
Oh.
blow up. Like he's like super cute. Like he's like this like, teen boy who's doing this like kind of Ed Sheeran-y like singer-songwriter vibe. Like I'm like, he's gonna be huge. And it was before Stitches even like really like took off. And so I like produced like this whole feature around him where I got like the video team in, I got like a photographer. Like I really was like really on one. Like I was just like, I'm doing this myself. Like I'm like, who cares? Like I didn't even tell my editor. I was like, I'm just gonna let you know when it's done and then you could like take a look at it. And so
It's amazing.
and so the piece did really well, and he ended up blowing up. It was like the first big feature on him that had been written at that time. Like he hadn't really done a lot of interviews, and so that was a big one where it was like he was on the cover like a year later or something. I felt really proud of that one because I was just like, I like produced this big Shawn Mendes feature, and like I like beat like the Times and like all these other publications, and like I was just like, I feel really like smart for doing that. And so I done that like a couple of times with stuff, and was really just like proud of that. And like Cardi is obviously like, again, like an early example. Like Lizzo was someone I had been covering since like when Truth Hurts first came out. I covered the song a bunch and like covered her, and then obviously those songs blew up like 2 years after. And so there's been like a few artists like that where I'm just like, okay, like I'm really glad that I like followed that instinct when I did.
And also, yeah, it's funny you bring up Shine and like Vine, because I think that was such a like foreshadow to the scope of the internet and TikTok and artists, relationships with that platform.
Yeah.
I was listening to an interview with you, I think it was like around COVID, and you were like predicting a bit of like who like comes from that platform, what sticks and what doesn't. And you said like, I think there's going to be some really like consistent breakthrough pop artists and who came from that platform. And I think like a perfect example is Addison Rae. You just did a cover story on her. Can you talk a little bit about like, yeah, like what's your perspective on TikTok and like how it's so much impacted music today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just like more a symptom of how like discovery changes. So, I think that the way that people find stuff changes like every few years. And it's like for a while it was like Vine, and for, can be Instagram or Twitter, like any like YouTube, whatever. Like, I think there's like a lot of changes that happen every few years and how people engage with like sharing stuff and like posting things and like being able to find like wider audiences. So obviously TikTok is just like that version of it now. I'm sure even in the next like year or two it's going to change again, but it's been, I think, it's a social media app that people are on like 24/7, and so obviously it's like had a huge impact on how people's like brains work, and how songs get spread, and sort of like our associations with those songs or with those artists. So yeah, I think it's just like people are just like spending so much time on it. Like obviously it was going to impact like how artists blew up or how songs blew up or how already popular artists are able to share their music. So yeah, it's been interesting like how long it's sort of been able to keep that hold too. So I'm curious like how much longer we'll be able to.
What do you think is going to be next? Like, do you think video form is here to stay for people in terms of like promoting and connecting with their music?
I think for now, yeah. Like I don't know like what is going to move next. I'm wondering if like more like analog stuff is going to have like a moment, because I feel like people are like a little bit tired of like algorithms in a way. So yeah, I'm curious like what that's going to look like. I feel like we might just like get really into like playlisting or something, or like bringing back like mixes in a way, because I feel like people are just kind of like want a little bit less of this like robotic curation of things that feel more personal. So yeah, I don't know. I'm curious like I feel like there's definitely like a little bit of a fatigue there, but I do think video obviously is just like, again, just the way a lot of our brains work now. So like I feel like it is kind of like hard to step away from it. Like I don't know. I think it's like obviously still like a very catchy way to get people's attention. So I don't really see it going away totally, but it may shift form. If it's not TikTok, it's like, people, like even just like the day that like TikTok was shut down, like people immediately moved to another video app, or like they started using Reels, and like, it's like they just kind of like, we all have like sort of like an addiction to like scrolling through content. So I don't know that's going to entirely move anytime soon.
That's a good point. Everyone was like not accepting it. They were like jumping ship immediately. I remember like
Yeah.
that night I was just staring at my phone and being like, wait, do I go to Red Note? Like, what do I do? Like, I'm also like feel personally validated by that because I'm intentionally not doing video for my podcast. I've never been the type to watch podcasts. And I mean, that's
Yeah.
totally a personal choice. And I think I'm putting a huge challenge on myself because I still have to make content for social media. And I'm like, how do I do that? That doesn't feel like it's like AI or something.
Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
you feel like in terms of like community, like the internet has been a big reason for why fandom has grown so much in recent years?
I think it's a big reason why fandom sucks now, but like I don't think it's
Mm,
the reason why it's grown. Like fandom's always existed, and I think like, there was people found ways to build community well before the internet through it. Like, there were like for like the Beatles, like girls shared like zines and like mailed them to each
yeah.
other, and like had meetups and thinking about like even just like the like Star Trek fandom and like the decades that they have had like huge like conventions and
Right.
things like that. It's like that's always existed both in and without and both in and outside of music. But I think with the internet, I think it's like there are pros to it where it's like you're able to like really communicate and like build those communities even wider and like
Mhm.
make friends in a really cool way and like meet people like halfway across the world. Like I know so many people in my life who um have like gone to concerts in different countries and then like have gone with like random people that they like met someone in Germany and like they like flew
Yeah.
out to Germany to go see like Taylor Swift and like went to go see the concert with them. Like that part's really cool. I think internet has like sort of created obviously a lot of, like stan wars and this competition, and I think it becomes like
Right.
so much less about the actual artist or the music and more so about like success and numbers. And I
Yeah.
think that really is gross and sucks because I don't think that as a fan that should be your concern. I don't think that's what fandom is about. And like it's not
Yeah.
about like is your artist number one. It's like really just like loving the music and like loving the relationships that you gain from it. I think that part sucks because I think it's, internet and sort of this like nature of how it works now is like so much about competition, and I just like the song.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Who did you say like are the biggest rivalries in pop?
I actually don't know that there's like really like I think there's obviously periods of time where there was like actual like Lil Monsters versus Katy Cats or like
Yeah. Right,
um
right, right.
like stuff like that, but like I actually like it's weird because I don't feel like there's like actual like one-to-one rivalries right at this moment. Like I just feel
Hmm.
like it's like your artist versus everyone else, and I think
Yeah.
that's kind of the vibe of the last couple of years in a weird way, where like you have like your someone with like a Ariana Grande picture is like kind of in competition with everyone who's not Ariana Grande or has not
Yeah.
shown support for her. Um,
Right.
so, I think that's kind of the vibe right now. Like there were so many periods of like the 2010s where it was like this artist versus this artist. And a lot of that came from just like those specific artists having an actual feud or like an actual like negative interaction. But now it feels like very much like anyone who's not that artist is in competition
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting
unless they're
it.
like friends.
Yeah, right, right. But I'm totally imagining on Twitter like that Ariana Grande stan just like yelling at everyone. It's like such
Yeah.
a thing. But I think also kind of another perspective, at least like I've been seeing, with the pop girlies being so big, like Chappell and Sabrina and like Billy, they are such different fonts, but like they coexist really well, like more so than I feel like I've seen with other pop artists like from the 2010s. Like, do
Mhm.
you think something has evolved in that sense where people are a little bit more like open-minded?
Yeah. I mean, I think like I feel like I don't really like see it so much with the art, like the fans that much. With the artists, I
Yeah,
feel like I think maybe this is the reason why there isn't so much like one-to-one fighting anymore between fandoms is like I think
right.
the artists, especially like the women in the music industry specifically because they often were the ones pitted against each other. I
Yeah.
think they sort of came to realize how much they were becoming like weapons of the industry to like create these conflicts for
Mm,
their own for like the industry's gain and how it was kind of
yeah.
destroying a lot of women in the industry. And so, I think for the most part, a lot of the younger girls are like, I will not be like that. There's no point in me being like that. Like, I would much rather, there's like actually, like, there's like quite literally room for more than one, in a way that, like, I think like a lot of patriarchal parts of like the entertainment industry and society at large, like, didn't allow this idea of like more than one person existing. Especially in like subgenres more than anything. There's always kind of like a woman that was sort of like meant to be elevated more than others. And we're at a point that like maybe like a few of the pros of streaming, and there are very few pros of like streaming culture because artists are not getting paid, but like, one of the few pros of it is the fact that it does allow a lot of people to create like much larger fan communities than previously. Like, I feel like there's a lot of like, there's people who are constantly like can sell out like, a Radio City size venue or even like Madison Square Garden that don't have any hits at all, don't have any like technical sort of like top 10 hits, or like aren't, tabloidy or have the same coverage as other artists, and still have like a giant fandom. So that's pretty cool because, like, I mean, even, this last year, like, it's like someone like Chappell Roan a decade, 2 decades ago, if she got dropped from that first label, like, that would have just literally been it. There would be no room for her to have grown her own fandom or be an independent artist or tour without that support. Or someone like Charlie, who is having like a career renaissance. She would have just been like a one-hit wonder in the 90s, and then there would be no sort of further interest or support in her kind of having this comeback moment. So it's cool, like, when you have artists who are able to like really kind of have that mix of their touring and like building a community through like being on the road, which is such an important part of that. Like, you can't really have that success without that element, but through the internet and through like streaming and through like social media, they're able to like really, nurture that fandom in a great way. So I think a lot of artists are like, oh yes, we can coexist and like have the success because we're not actually taking anything from each other.
Absolutely. I'm even thinking back to, like, I don't know how many years ago, I guess, when Taylor Swift was in her like bad blood kind of reputation era, and she was out with being seen with a lot of other females, like whether in the music industry or just in the public eye, and like how that was kind of seen in a negative context, where as now it's sort of what you're saying, like, I think she was sort of ahead of the game and like really normalizing that and like being like, there's room for all of us to be like successful. There's not like someone that should be on top of the other. Yeah. And I know like you definitely have some history with Taylor. That sounds like not personal history, but like career history. I know you taught a course at NYU. Can you talk a little bit about that and sort of like how her career has impacted yours?
I've been teaching this course at NYU's Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music. So it's like the program for students studying to be in the music industry in some capacity, mostly through performance or production. I'm teaching this semester. I taught it twice before. And the course, it's like, a half semester, like, music history course, really. Sort of like this like cultural biography of her, where we kind of go through in chronological order her life and her career, but it's also sort of like a close analysis of certain themes that come up through different eras in her career, whether it's like feminism or celebrity or songwriting about love and relationships, or the diaristic elements of her songwriting and sort of the relationship that her music has with her own public image. So yeah, so it's really interesting and fun. But yeah, I've she's someone who I've been listening to since I was in high school and have been covering since I've started writing professionally. So it was like kind of like one of the more like obvious artists for me to pitch a class on, because she's someone I like could talk about all the time and know too much about and think about a lot. So it's like, was a very easy class to put together.
That's so cool. Yeah. I think it kind of goes back to the beginning again of like, you had this innate passion for it and it like makes sense. It kind of unfolded from there. For someone who's like more of a Taylor skeptic, which can mean a lot of things, I guess, like, how would you argue like her impact on pop music and like the way the industry looks today?
I mean, I think she had a pretty immediate impact from the moment she debuted. Like, she came onto the country scene at a time when a lot of women weren't being played on radio, or, you know, I mean, it's still a huge problem, but yeah, I think it was sort of a very bro-y era of music, and I think it opened a lot of doors for a lot of women to, you know, find their voices, get signed, like have, you know, more of a presence in country music. Obviously, still there's a lot of hurdles in that, but you know, I think she did sort of like reopen some of those doors. I think she also really kind of forced people to take teen singer-songwriters seriously.
Yeah.
I think the idea of like a teenager having any sort of agency in their career or in their music making is like Taylor's the only reason why we have taken artists like, you know, Lorde or Billie Eilish or Olivia Rodrigo seriously. I think that, you know, they would have been infantilized or seen as like these, like, you know, curated machine built sort of pop machine built artists. And I think Taylor putting her songwriting at the forefront from the start of her career really had a huge impact on us being able to take those artists seriously and see them as like actual like creative beings, and people who have like really adept and smart sort of pop writing skills. So I think she was very important to that, because I think prior to that it was so much like either an artist is seen as like a cog in this like industry, or, you know, kind of like a puppet, like a teen girl mostly is seen as that, or a prodigy who sort of is like a flash in the pan sort of deal, you know, or like doesn't, you know, Taylor sort of shifted that narrative of what a teen could do.
I love that. Yeah, I think you're so right. Like when you said Olivia Rodrigo, driver's license, I don't think would have been as big as it was if Taylor hadn't like kind of paved the way of like being taken seriously for her songwriting in that kind of romantic, whimsical way. Yeah, that's why I think pop music right now also is so big in a vulnerable way that it hasn't been before. Like Good Luck Babe by Chappell. Like I don't know. Do you think someone would even like have written something like that like 10 years ago?
It definitely wouldn't have blown up. Like I think so. Yeah. Like I think like of course, you know, and I think it's also like a testament of a lot of, for like the moment that we're seeing Chappell, and I think she's been really good at sort of talking about this, is like there were a lot of really great queer songwriters and pop stars prior to Chappell who just like weren't able to like reach this far, and it's been like years of like really kind of like clawing at the industry and like trying and like being open, and like a lot of bravery for decades that allowed sort of this moment to happen. And I mean, obviously it's also like Chappell's own sort of like, you know, years and years of like really, really working at this. But yeah, I mean, like, those songs existed. It's just like really incredible that one finally blew up.
Yeah.
You know, and like and again, like it's a mixture of that testament of like timing and like all the artists that came before her, but also like herself and her own like years and years and years of hard work.
100%. Right. It's not like she just rolled out of bed and released Good Luck Babe. There was like tons of history behind that. Yeah, in her career. Yeah, I'm curious to see like now that that's sort of something, especially of those themes of like discovering your sexuality and things like that. Like I wonder how receptive people will be to more of that as it sort of unfolds.
Yeah.
Do you have any artists that you are like kind of in that moment right now where you're keeping your eye on, and like maybe I'll be writing a cover story like a year from now, and any standouts?
I'm really into this artist, Sam Austin's. He's really good. He's been around for a minute. And he has a song called Seasons that's been doing really well. And I'm curious, like what.
I'm like feverishly writing this.
I'm curious if that song's gonna blow up some more. But he's gonna be on tour with Magdalena Bay. But I really, really love that song. I've been obsessed with it for months, and I'm kind of hoping that it sort of like continues building and continues getting more attention. I've been a fan of Lola Young for a minute, so I'm happy that like Messy has been taking off. So I'm hoping that there's like even more. I'm also like an album that is not out yet, but I like obviously, you know, listened to early was coming that I think people will really get into, and I'm hoping it's like a big year for her, is Jensen McRae. I like, you know, she's been around also for a minute, and she, you know, she released her debut album a few years ago, but I think this album is going to be like a big breakthrough moment for her. and it's like so much bigger sounding. And I mean, the lead single "Praying for Your Downfall" is like really, really good, but it's been like on repeat. So I'm excited for people to hear that album.
That's really exciting. I also ask my guests to curate like a short playlist of songs that like they're into. So if you're down for that, I definitely will be listening to yours. This is sort of, I probably will keep it in. I'm more just asking because I like picking your brain. You're just very knowledgeable. But like in terms of like openers for tours, like I just think of like as an example, like Benson Boone being like the opener for Taylor in like London. Like, do you think there's a big correlation of like openers and their rise to fame?
Yeah, like I think it's a really big, I mean, touring's always going to be like the biggest boost an artist can get. I think like no matter what, above all else, like experiencing music in person is always going to be like the biggest thing that can exist. Like I think if you're a really good performer, like that's going to be like the thing that like actually builds your career. I think like it's been very noticeable that we've had like a lot of success and like artist breakthrough in the last few years because touring's been so back and so like bigger than ever, and like everyone's been on tour. I think that has clearly been like the thing that's helped a lot of artists is having that moment. I think like you know like I think like you know it's like clear with like Chappell and Olivia, like the timing of Chappell being on the Olivia tour when she was like was a big help, and like Sabrina being on the Taylor tour, and like you know like Benson doing a couple of Eras tour shows as well, and you know I think like the timing of that is like it's really hard to like not put that together because it is such like a big helpful thing. I mean, the way that we share touring videos now and like how people like really love to experience them, and like artists have found all these ways to create like sort of new and spontaneous parts of the actual shows. You know, I think that when a newer artist is like on those tours, it's a huge boost to get more eyes on them.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and I feel like at least for like the acts that you were just talking about, like they feel really intentional in terms of like openers, whereas before, I don't know if this is just like, because I don't know as much of like who chooses the openers, like if it's artists have more of a say now, or like I know like Chappell and Olivia like had the same producer, like there just feels like there's more of a connection of like the cohesion of who's opening for who than in the past, where like there's just more, I don't know if it's the internet, I just feel like I'm noticing more of an awareness of openers than there has been in the past.
Yeah, it feels like it's like people that the artists are actually like genuinely fans of or friends with.
Exactly, where it's not like they just met in the green room like 10 minutes before they go on or something like that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was really cool. I just as a music lover, like getting to kind of pick your brain has been really insightful, and yeah, I am really excited to keep following your career and see what's to come for you.
Thank you so much for having me.
So many hours putting words in your mouth to think I thought